Well, hey, what's up, Real Life Church? I am super excited to be with you today. And if I do my job well, then you will be excited that I'm here with you. So we'll see how we do. Great to have you here in the room. Great to have you, those that are watching outside, as well as our online audience. Thank you guys for checking in. So right now, I am currently at a church on the East Coast, right, in Myrtle Beach. So it's actually, East Coast people, let's go. It's actually past my bedtime right now, just so you know. So this could go anywhere, just be ready. But we're on the East Coast and at a multi-site church there. And so, like you guys, we actually did beach baptisms at the end of the summer back in August. And it was fantastic. We had over 80 some people that signed up for that beach baptism. And then on the day of, we went out in the afternoon and we had like this little courtyard area of grass that we met in. We had several hundred people that came to be part of it. Then we walked across the street and we did the baptisms. It was just super awesome. We filled up the beach. We just stormed onto the sand. And incredible moment, much like I watched your guys, really fantastic. Well, as part of that, we had our production team that was recording all the baptisms, and we flew a drone and counted out over the ocean so we could create really cool follow-up baptism video to celebrate. Okay, so we did that. Well, on the next day, we get a staff text. So one of our production guys that was flying the drone had taken some pictures, and he sent a picture from the drone of what had gone on in the water, and there's a large object that was in the water behind us. I think we have this picture. Do you see the circle? There's something real. So I'm right here. There's something really big. It's either a very, very big fish or Jaws, right? It could be that. I don't know. I grew up in the middle, so everything big in the water, I assume, is Jaws. So I already put a request in for next year that I will stay on the beach and do the baptisms from the sand or coordinate from the sand. We had a staff member, right, that thought he was funny, and he said, must have smelled the blood of the lamb in the water. So we fired him for cheesy Christian. I'm kidding. We just put him on probation and made him get counseling. That is totally joking there as well. But hey, super excited to be with the Real Life family. I've gotten to know your leadership over the last few years, and they're just fantastic. So honored to get to come and share with you as we continue today in the story. And we'll be in chapter 7, and I think that you'll find this chapter particularly beneficial and maybe encouraging to real life in this season, and hopefully you personally. So, you ready to jump in? Let's go. All right, let's start with a question. How many of you have had seasons in your life, or maybe areas of your life of some uncertainty, right? A few things that you weren't sure about, you weren't certain about, like maybe some unknowns. I don't know what's coming next. Maybe some new territory you were venturing into, and so you're like, I'm not sure what's going to happen here. And here, one of the greatest catalysts for fear in our lives is uncertainty, is it not? Like, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what's coming next. And can we admit that as a culture, we have this really strange obsession with fear, right? Like, hello, Halloween season. No? Haunted house fans, anyone? Some of you, right? Freaky horror movies. Like we will pay people good money to make us scream, like middle school girls at a Taylor Swift concert, right? Put us on the edge of heart attack as entertainment, okay? Like, I don't do that because I'm sane. Some of you do that, though, for sure, right? And we all wrestle with fear, right? We do, at different levels. Some of us, there's some really big fears. For some of you, maybe there are smaller fears, weird fears, quirky fears. Some of you may be afraid of, the future. What is going to happen with your kids? It's a crazy season. We have fears as it relates to our family dynamic, right? Maybe like health or hereditary issues, like when is this gonna come get me? Maybe addiction issues that have been in your family. We have, again, fear of the unknown, right? We talked about uncertainty. Fear of failure. What if I try and I totally blow it? Fear of success. What if I do really good and then I can't do it again, or the expectations are high? A business venture, starting something new. Lots of risk, lots of angst with that. Where is the marriage going? Where is the job and the company going? We all face fears in our lives. And sometimes, fear of uncertainty or fear of the unknown, it can just start to overwhelm us. And if we're not careful, it can start to cripple us, right? So a couple years ago, I'm taking a flight across the country. And so I get checked in, I get on my seat, I get situated. The entire flight gets loaded, and we get the pre-flight instructions. And so then we back out away from the gate, and we start to head towards the runway, and the plane stops. And we just sit on the tarmac for 30 minutes or so, and no communication from the pilot. We're just sitting there. Well, I'm sitting in a seat that's right in front of an exit row. So there is a flight attendant that is standing right behind me. And at some point in this wait, she gets on her personal phone, which I'm not sure if that's regulation standard, but she gets on her phone and she's talking to a friend. And here's what I hear her say from behind me. She said, "We've got a hurdler," right? And so at first I thought I heard her say, "We've got a hurdler." So I'm like, is there a track and field meet that I don't know about that we're waiting on? But she did in fact say, "We have a hurdler." It turns out some guy on the plane, and just like he's this massive guy, just a bear of a man, but he's never flown, right? So he panicked, right, as soon as we started heading towards the runway, and he just started puking, started hurling in his seat. So then he squeezes past the other seated passengers by him, and he heads towards the back, right down the aisle, just throwing up all the way to the bathroom. Gets to the bathroom, locks himself in the bathroom, and just stays in there, just panicked, and he can't get it together, man. He just can't. So we sit for another 15, 20 minutes. Finally, the pilot comes on and says, "Hey, we're gonna have to go back because this guy's not gonna make it," right? So we're gonna have to turn around, go back, drop him off, and refuel. So we get back to the gate, and then we still have to wait several minutes, man, because they have to coax him out of the bathroom. And finally, he comes out and just does the full walk of shame, right? He's got to go past everyone, and he's just a total mess. And I felt so bad for him, right? Because again, he's just a big guy, but he can hardly walk. And finally, he gets off the plane, and then they have the cleanup crew come in, right? It's like the guys off Monsters Inc., the hazmat guys with the human sock, right? It's Jonathan, clean up on aisle 25 through 37, plus the bathroom, plus the flight attendant station, right? Everything. So I didn't take any snacks on that flight for sure. But then finally they get it all cleaned up and get us fueled up and back onto the runway. And we take off a couple hours after we were supposed to fly. But that poor guy, he let fear control him and control his plans. I guess he can still do road trips, but this is what fear tries to do in your life, in my life, an unhealthy fear, right? There's a healthy fear, but unhealthy to control you, even try and steal joy and vitality from you. So the challenge becomes this. Here's the challenge, that fear oftentimes tries to compete with our faith. And many times God will then call us to step into the fear and through the fear and step forward in faith. And this is where we find ourselves today in the story, okay? This is where Joshua and an entire new generation of God's people, this is what they find themselves facing. That after 40 years of just doing laps in the cul-de-sac of the desert, right? Just take another lap, and now do another lap. Okay, now finally, they're about to move forward into new territory that's unfamiliar, right? That is unknown to them. That is something that they just haven't experienced. And so how will they do that? So there's going to be some battles. There's going to be some challenges. And fear can cripple them, right? Or faith can compel them forward. There's a guy named Dale Bonner. He wrote a book called Changing Your Trajectory. And here's what he writes in that book. He says this. He says, your future is not based on where you are. It is based on where you decide to stay, right? Which I think is a really profound statement. Maybe for school, you're not where you want to be, or in life, or in marriage. Okay, your future's not based on where you are, it's based on where you decide to stay. Again, I think a profound statement, and it is the reality of Joshua and God's people right now. So let's dive into chapter 7. I believe it's page 89 in your book. I'm actually reading it on the Kindle, so I'm not sure. I think you're 89. This section, it is full of like swords and battles. It sounds like an episode out of Lord of the Rings. But as we begin the chapter, so Joshua and the Israelites, no doubt, they're facing some fears and they're facing some real uncertainty and some real unknown. So let's take a look and see what it says. We'll pick it up. First 5 words out of Joshua chapter 1, verse 1. Here's what we're told. After the death of Moses. And you heard a lot about Moses last week. So listen, do not rush past those first 5 words and that verse, because this is huge, right? This is a monumental moment. Because again, how long has Moses been leading the Israelite people? 40 years, right? Like we are still watching movies about that guy. We're still singing songs about Moses and the Prince of Egypt. God speaks to Moses through a burning bush. Moses calls down the 10 plagues on Egypt, leads God's people out of slavery and out of bondage, right? Moses gets to part the Red Sea. I mean, God does it, right? But Moses does it for him on his behalf. Okay, so like the approval rating for Moses is off the charts. These are massively big shoes to fill and a tough act to follow. Okay, not only that, and again, in chapter 6, you see Moses gets to lead God's people through what I lovingly like to refer to as all of the drama in the desert, right? The grumbling, the complaining, like they're about to make it to the promised land, then the shot clock resets because they grumbled again and just keep doing laps. And so now after all that, they are finally on the edge of the promised land. And Moses dies, right? Like does that seem like a bit of a ripoff to anyone besides me? Like if you go back and you were to look at Deuteronomy chapter 34, there we're told that God lets Moses go up on Mount Nebo and he gets a peek at the promised land right before they ever go in. He gets a peek and God's like, here's how I imagine it. God's like, there it is, Moses, right? Take a look. What do you think? And Moses goes, he's like, that is awesome, right? And God's like, really? Do you like it? Moses is like it. I love it. It's so great. And then God basically says, well, all right, we'll get a good look because you're not going in. Huh? But I thought about this, right? So I know that's a hard call for Moses, but listen, if we can just be devotional just for a moment and be really, really honest. Moses has a really great story in so many ways. And we love to retell the story of Moses. But this part of Moses' story, he gets the desert, right? The Israelites have to go through the desert to get to the promised land. They will get there, but they have to go through a desert season first. God's doing some preparation, doing some trimming even. And this will be end of the line for Moses. That's it. And I thought about that because listen, and I'm going to use this as metaphor, but just consider, there have been stuff in my life, right? Anger issues, some alcohol addiction in grandparents, depression, insecurity. And listen, if I have to go through some desert season to fight and to battle and to learn to surrender to God so that some of that stuff dies with me and doesn't get passed on to the next generation, right? So they can walk in a different level of freedom and hope. All right, game on, let's go, right? Moses' part of the story, at least here, is the desert. And listen, that matters. It was important. And I would say, don't feel too sorry for Moses because I promise you, he's not bummed out by this little situation. In fact, he's probably going, seriously? You guys have several battles coming up. I've seen God's day planner. You're going to be busy fighting. I'm going to heaven. So good luck with that, Joshua. Peace out, right? And he's out. And now the baton gets handed to Joshua, Okay? So now it's Joshua and the Israelites standing on the precipice, looking across the Jordan at the promised land, at Jericho, right? The promised land where spies years ago said, oh, they're so big and scary and they're giants and we're so small. Jericho, known as this fortified city with like an outer wall that's 6 feet thick, followed by an inner wall that's over 12 feet thick, right? Filled up with just, armed and trained guards. So good luck busting through that. So here's where they're at. So now they're stepping into the unknown, right? Lots of question marks. What's coming next? What's this going to be like? With an unknown, right? Not an unknown, an untested and an unproven leader. This is why God will keep telling them, if you read through Joshua, be strong and courageous. Did I mention be strong and courageous? You should be strong and courageous. So, will they let fear or will they let faith take the wheel and lead them? They're going to need a really, really good battle plan. So let's go and take a look at what God has in store for them. Hey, listen, if you have never read the story and you think you know what's coming with God's plan, get ready to be surprised, right? Like, what will God use to help them face their fear and go into the next season? How about 3 things that you would never choose or imagine in a million years? All right, you ready? 3 things God will use to help them face their fears, prepare for this battle. If you're taking notes, and you can write these down. I love to take notes. Here's the first thing. Number 1 that God will use, a prostitute. All right? Like, I'm not even making that up. On pages 90, 91 in the story, this is what we find. That a prostitute named Rahab lives in Jericho. And Joshua is going to send 2 spies now to go do a little reconnaissance work, right? Like scope it out, see if there's some weak spots, some vulnerable areas they could maybe focus on. And they end up in the home of Rahab the prostitute, which I want you to just recognize how clever this really is, right? Because the king in Jericho will find out that there are spies in his city and they are at the home of Rahab. So he sends some men, some guards, whatever, to go and investigate and interrogate. So they show up and they're like, where are these spies at? And like, I'm assuming, but she basically says, look, I don't know, right? Like, we get a lot of visitors, right, that come in for business. Right? Usually not a lot of conversation. We conduct business, they leave. Are you tracking? Like, I'm trying to keep this very PG. You with me here? Right? They show up. She's like, I don't know. Like, but I want you to see how brilliant that move is, because they're like, got it, okay. Which way did they go? And so she just like makes up some story, right, to send them in the wrong direction so she can buy some time for the spies that she's hidden to escape. She's like, they came, they left. If you hurry, chop, chop, maybe you'll catch them. So this is what we read in Joshua chapter 2, verses 4 through 6. We're told, but the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them. She said, yes, the men came to me, but I did not know where they came from, right? Like, we don't do background checks. At dusk, when it was time to close the city gate, they left. I don't know which way they went. Go after them quickly. You may catch up with them. But she had taken them up on the roof and hidden them under the stalks of flax she had laid out on the roof. So think about this. Joshua is about to enter into unfamiliar territory, right? That is violent, hostile, filled with people that hate him and that have significant military resource, all right? So he has some good reason to be anxious or nervous or have a little fear. And God sends support, right? Sends an ally in the form of a prostitute, which, by the way, is such a God move, is it not? Like, does God not just consistently use the unlikely and the unexpected, the down and out, the counted out, the cast out, to write a really awesome, amazing story? Like, I promise you this, I promise you that Rahab could have never imagined in 1,000 years, million years, the significance her name would have simply by acting in faith, right? Just on behalf of these spies. And listen, like her name now, it isn't just part of her, lower story. You've talked through lower story there in Jericho and the life she lived. Her name becomes part of the greater meta-narrative, right? Of God's upper story as she gets mentioned three times in the New Testament, right? She gets mentioned in James. So James chapter 2, alongside of Abraham, right? Like, how about that? Father Abraham and prostitute Rahab. Like there's a dynamic duo who both get highlighted by Jesus' little brother James because of their great acts of faith, right? And like, understand that this section, it's not prescriptive. It's not telling you what you have to do, just what happened. So like, you shouldn't think, I should go out tonight and find a prostitute, right, to have coffee with so that I can overcome my fears and discern God's will for my life. But never underestimate what God will do with a person of faith. Never, right? Like, I would tell you this, your faith is a much bigger, better indicator of your future and your potential than your past, right? Than your resume, than what have you. Your faith is such a great, bigger, better indicator of all the potential you have and the future God would have for you, right? And I just assume, like, right now, someone in the room, you need to hear that you may right now be in the middle of a chapter in the story of your life that you don't really like, that you're disappointed with, that you feel broken by, that you feel hopeless in. But listen, there's always, always, always another chapter ready and waiting to be written, and a God who cannot wait to use your faithfulness as you do. So trust like that. Next thing, she gets mentioned. Hebrews chapter 11, all right? The great Hall of Fame faith chapter in the Bible. So Abraham and Joseph and Moses and Joshua, David, Gideon, all there, and so is Rahab. Like, I don't know what you imagine the Hall of Fame, Hall of Faith chapter, who it should include, but a prostitute who chose to believe and trust God makes the list. And then finally, she gets mentioned in Jesus' genealogy, right? Matthew chapter 1. So Matthew includes in his lineage for Jesus, right? 4 women, and one of them is Rahab. To which I would simply say that more important than where you start, right? More important than where you come from is how you finish. Like, it's really easy to start some things. It's really easy to walk down the aisle and say, I do. It's much harder to finish the marriage well. It's really easy, to walk down the aisle and get baptized. Much harder to finish well. Or maybe you started with some things that were just handed to you that you didn't deserve. But how you finish is so much more important. And God will use your faith to write an amazing story if you trust him. So first thing that God uses to help them battle their fear, prostitute. All right, second thing, if you are taking notes, that will be a scalpel. How about that? So here's what we read, Joshua 5:2. At that time, the Lord said to Joshua, make flint knives and circumcise the Israelites again. All right, so circumcision, right? Like, men, show of hands. How many of you would not be Team Jesus if that was still the entrance requirement? Right? So I'll just say this quick for time's sake because we've got to keep moving. So the Israelites are about to go into battle with Jericho. And instead of preparing in some traditional way, which I don't know what the traditional way is, like I watch movies where, you've got the tyrant king oppressing like the peasants. And so some noble knight comes in and teaches them how to shoot arrows and sword fight to resist the tyrant king. Like, instead of something like that, they go in for a little outpatient surgery, right? Like Joshua standing at the entrance to the tent with a flint knife going, turn your head and cough. This is going to sting a little bit. Like, definitely did not help them get into fighting shape, right? But listen, God had made a covenant with his people, and this was a sign that they were set apart as his, to which I would say more important sometimes than preparation for battle, or always, is faithful obedience to God. Here's, again, for time, I'm not even going to unpack that or give you direction, just you can write it down and you and God work that out later, all right? Next thing, final thing, God uses to help the Israelites face their fears in this season of uncertainty and prepare for battle. Number 3, are you ready? A marching band. Does that surprise anyone? After the first 2, it shouldn't, all right? So this is when God will finally send Joshua in to do battle against Jericho, right? Remember the really big city with the fortified walls and this well-guarded? Okay, so here's what we read now as they're finally going into battle. And I want you to pay attention to God's grammar. Here's what we read. Joshua chapter 6, verse 2. We're told, then the Lord said to Joshua, see, I have delivered Jericho into your hands, along with its king and its fighting men. Okay, and so if you're new to church, you're not familiar with the story, just so you're clear, at this point as God's saying this, the battle has not happened yet, right? So I imagine Joshua going, seriously? Because I'm looking at my hands and guess what I don't see, right? They're still on the other side of that really big wall. We're still back here with no real military presence or army. But God says what? I have delivered, right? Past tense, as if it's a done deal. So let me just summarize, if you are new to church, how this plays out. So this will be Joshua's first really big assignment as the leader of God's people, right? He's going to go out and have this little one-on-one with God. So he leaves camp, goes to meet one-on-one with God. And God basically tells him, he's like, all right, listen, game time, right? We are going to battle. Do you have a marching band? Okay, cool. Here's what I need you to do. I need you to have them go and march around that thing 7 times. Then when they're done, have the brass section blow their horns. Everyone else yell like they just hit the game-winning shot of the big game, and then go take the city. And I imagine Joshua's like, and what else, right? Do I get a tank or a bazooka or something? God's like, no, that's it. And so then Joshua goes back to camp and all the people. And again, I imagine Joshua's like, all right, guys, so I know that I'm really new at this whole leadership thing, but here's what we're gonna do. Band guys, band, stand up, right? All the band guys are like, us? So they stand up. He's like, hey, can you guys fight? No? Okay, not a problem. Can you play the trumpet? You can? All right, get up here. Come on. I need you guys to go and get your hats, right, with the little plumey feather things on top. Put it on, grab your trumpet, and start doing circles around the city. And then when I tell you, let her fly, man. Just blow the trumpet, blast them. Everyone else, shout like you're crazy. Go take the city. All right, everyone in, trumpets on 3. 1, 2, all right. You have to know someone in the camp is going, who in the world nominated this clown to take over for Moses? And the answer is, God did, right? That is God's plan. God would say, hey, march around once a day, 1 lap a day for 6 days. Don't throw a rock, don't give a dirty look, don't trash talk, march. And then on the 7th day, do the same thing 7 times. And here's what we read down in chapter 6, verse 20. When the trumpet sounded and the army shouted, and at the sound of the trumpet, when the men gave a loud shout, the wall collapsed. So everyone charged straight in, and they took the city. Think about this. Can you imagine if they had just marched around 5 days, been like, this is dumb, right? Like, this is so embarrassing. Like, we're a total joke and laughing stock. We're wasting our time here. Or if they had got 7 days and 3 or 4 laps, and been like, what are we even doing? Like, God is just messing with us. I don't even know if Joshua really heard from him. We're out of here. Okay, then they don't see the victory, right? And they don't receive the promise. So listen, faith keeps showing up, even when it's hard, even when it doesn't make sense. I'll just tell you that when you move in faith and God meets you there, you will find this unbelievable level of freedom and confidence, right? Because each of these steps, right, these 3 steps we've talked about, that they take into the unknown, God's battle plan or God's strategy, these are acts of faith, are they not? And like elevated acts of faith. Trust the prostitute who's on team enemy. Get circumcised before we go to battle, because that feels good. Follow this really ridiculous battle strategy, right? Let's blow the kazoos at the big wall. Okay, why? Because when you fuel your faith, fear will subside, right? Whatever you fuel or feed your mind with, that is what will grow. And stick with me for a minute here, like, don't judge me, but we spent several years in Dallas, and so when my son was little, we would watch the Cowboys. And so I remember when Ezekiel Elliott first came on, and when he would get a big run or he'd get a big score, he would always do the feed the beast motion. That's true, man. If you feed your fear, right? Watch certain news feeds. Listen to hypercritical or negative or contentious or divisive or hateful, hurtful voices. Listen to the lies of the enemy. Jump on the runaway train of negativity. Just believe the worst. And I'm not talking about being naive. I'm just talking about which story you choose to stick with, though. If you do that, right, your fear will grow. This is what happened to the previous generation, was it not? The 10 spies that went in and like, oh, they're big and we don't have a chance. They are big. But Joshua, Caleb, they chose faith. Like, we're not naive, they're big. But how about God? Like he just defeated the mightiest army on the planet in Egypt. Like, I think he can handle tall people. If you allow fear to exist in your mind long enough, those fears will start to become facts because you will live them into existence. Or you can feel your faith, right? Like Joshua, like Caleb did. Be strong and be courageous. Trust God's plan and trust God's promise. I would even say, not just trust, cling. Like your life depends on it, to God's plan and God's promise. When everything is falling down around you in those seasons, where everything's swirling, it doesn't make sense, you cling to those things. We're told throughout Scripture, throughout the Bible, fear not, right? Jesus himself, he makes 125 command statements during his earthly ministry. Of those command statements, the one that he mentions the most, over 20 times, guess what it is? Fear not. Do not be afraid. Take heart. Have courage. Why? Because for sure, there is a lot of stuff, right, that wants us to be afraid, to lose heart, to give up. But listen, don't miss this. God did not bring you where you are to leave you where you are. Right now, you may have put yourself in some spots that he never intended, but when you walk and trust him in faith, listen, he brought you to take you where he's going to take you, all right? And the journey, you have to understand, right, that it is filled with fear and with faith, right? All of our journeys. And you have to decide which one you will fuel and let lead. In your life, in my life, for sure in my life, you will always face this fear and faith tension, right? It's just constantly going on. most of the major decisions that I've made in my life, fear and faith, like right there, side by side, right? Like they're competing for who's gonna take the lead. Like I picture like some scene out of the Fast and Furious, like each of them are in a hot rod, revving the engine, like you wanna race for titles, right? Who? Fear, faith. This is just a real tension we all deal with. So I thought about seasons of my life, like when we graduated, my wife and I, from college, right? I finished with a business degree in accounting. Top of the class, going into auditing. I'm gonna go corporate, make lots of money. And then we start feeling this call from God to go into ministry. Listen, man, I've just got my CPA. We bought a house. We are broke. Like, we need this job. And we decide to go back into college, at Bible college. And so we just let faith lead. And then as we got out of Bible college, we got to intern at this really great church in Colorado, just north of Denver on the Front Range. Had a great experience. As we neared the end of that internship, they offered us a full-time job. But listen, God did not give my wife or I peace about the position or the circumstance, although we had turned everything else down that had come up. Like, so we had no backup plan. This was gonna once again put us in a really, really hard situation. But we prayed and we trusted God, and faith continues to grow. And then after that season in Bible college and the internship, nothing comes up for us a while. That was really, really tough. And then God opened the door, this fantastic church in Las Vegas that had this unapologetic heart for reaching broken, messy, hurting people far from God and going on the rescue mission. And it was hard, and it was awesome. And God kept showing up in the faith-filled moments. I would tell you, most of the regrets in my life have for sure come when I let fear take the wheel and put faith in timeout. But anytime we've walked in faith, we just never, ever regretted those moments. And we'll close with this, right? Think about this. This entire scene, right? Entire scene, is it not this really great picture / foreshadowing of how God would work through Jesus? An unlikely person, right? An unlikely method that Jesus the Messiah would be born of a virgin to a peasant couple in a podunk town with shepherds announcing his arrival. You want to talk about lowly, unlikely, unrecognized, unwanted, the very people that God loves and that God pursues and gives great value to, right? And then an unlikely method, right? Not just marching around a wall and blowing horns, but the cross, where criminals and rebels get executed, where Jesus would be mocked and he would get ridiculed and Satan would do the happy dance until he didn't, and the walls came tumbling down and the stone was rolled away, and victory, right? Victory for God's people, victory for the children of God, victory for you and for I. When you walk in faith, right? When you walk in faith, it's not always easy. God will not disappoint and God will not fail. And just let me say this, right? Let me get really practical for you. You're in a season, are you not? Real life church of some uncertainty and some unknowns. And God has been so faithful to you in the past. I'm familiar with your story. It's awesome. And as you walk in faith, he will lead you to new, awesome season and territory. So I've been praying for you as you walk through this, maybe through some unlikely methods, maybe through some unexpected ways. But where you feed and fuel your faith and you keep starving the fear, God's gonna keep doing a wonderful work through you. So don't live in fear, right? Don't let it rule. Walk in faith, fill your heart, fill your mind with that. Trust God and his promises for you and through you, and they'll be really good. Church, I appreciate you. Let me pray. We'll wrap this up. Heavenly Father, I do thank you that you're such a good God who's going ahead of us and through us and behind us and who is always for us. I know that right now in the room, there are people walking in certain seasons of fear, that there's just some heavy things that are trying to crush them. I pray you would hold them close, that you would draw near to them, send them encouragement to keep trusting all that you have for them. And then I pray specifically for this body, for so many new promises and new seasons, new life change and new baptisms and new opportunity that you will use as they build on the past to lead to a beautiful new future. God, we pray these things in your son's name. Amen.